January 28, 1943. Hackney Mortuary, London. Coroner Bentley Purchase stared at the body on the metal slab, breath visible in the refrigerated air, the yellowed skin, the emaciated frame, the phosphorus poisoning that had shut down his liver 2 days earlier. This was Glyndwr Michael, age 34, homeless drifter from Wales, nobody and nothing. But Lieutenant Commander Ewan Montague saw something else entirely. He saw the key to deceiving Adolf Hitler. In 18 weeks, this corpse would lie to the Führer so convincingly that it would save 30,000 Allied lives, topple Mussolini's regime, and prove that the dead could win battles the living could not. The operation's code name was almost comic in its brutality: mincemeat. Winston Churchill faced an impossible problem in early 1943. North Africa was one. The Mediterranean belonged to the Allies. Every strategic analyst on both sides knew what came next. Sicily, the stepping stone to mainland Italy, the soft underbelly of Fortress Europe. It was so obvious that Churchill himself had growled the assessment that would haunt Allied planning. Everyone but a bloody fool would know it's Sicily. The mathematics were brutal. Sicily, 170 miles from North Africa, dotted with 18 airfields, ferry connections to mainland Italy every few hours. Greece, 850 miles from North Africa, mountainous terrain, limited strategic value. Sardinia, 400 miles, heavily fortified, no direct route to Germany. German intelligence wasn't staffed by fools. They would reinforce Sicily to the teeth. British planners estimated 10,000 Allied casualties in the first week alone. The Royal Navy expected to lose 300 ships to coastal defences and air attack. Those weren't projections, they were obituaries being written in advance. The directive from the Chiefs of Staff Committee was simple and terrifying: convince the Germans that Sicily was a feint, that the real invasion targets were Greece and Sardinia. Make them move divisions, make them waste resources, make them look the wrong way while 160,000 Allied troops smashed ashore on beaches they'd left vulnerable. The problem was credibility. German intelligence had spent 4 years learning to spot deception. They'd captured British agents, broken codes, intercepted signals. They knew the Allies would attempt to deceive them about Sicily, which meant any deception had to be perfect. Not good. Perfect. One inconsistency and the entire operation would be worse than useless. It would confirm to the Germans that Sicily was indeed the target. The answer came from a 1939 memo that compared wartime deception to fly fishing, the Trout Memo. Written by Rear Admiral John Godfrey, Director of Naval Intelligence, though everyone suspected his personal assistant actually penned it. That assistant was Lieutenant Commander Ian Fleming. Yes, that Ian Fleming, the future creator of James Bond. Item 28 on the memo's list of 54 deception schemes read like something from a thriller novel. A corpse dressed as an airman, with dispatches in his pockets, could be dropped on the coast, supposedly from a crashed plane. Fleming had lifted the idea from a 1937 crime novel called The Milliner's Hat Mystery. He'd noted it as a suggestion, not a very nice one. For 3 years, the idea sat dormant in naval intelligence files. Then Flight Lieutenant Charles Cholmondeley pulled it out. Cholmondeley was 25, gangly, 6'3", with eyesight so poor he'd never been allowed to fly, despite being in the RAF. He'd been seconded to MI5 and appointed Secretary of the 20 Committee, the XX Committee, also known as the Double Cross Committee, the group that ran Britain's captured German agents as double agents. Cholmondeley had a mind that saw deception as architecture. He spent his off hours studying the mating habits of insects and had once discovered a new species of shrew. His colleagues thought him odd. They had no idea how odd his next proposal would be. On October 31, 1942, Cholmondeley submitted his plan, Operation Trojan Horse. Take a corpse. Dress it as a courier carrying documents. Make it appear the courier died in a plane crash at sea. Let the body wash ashore in Spain, where pro-German Spanish officials would find the documents and pass them to the Abwehr. The 20 committee's reaction was immediate and unanimous. Rejected. Too risky. Too complicated. Too many ways it could fail. But the committee chairman, Sir John Masterman, saw potential. He assigned Ewan Montagu to work with Cholmondeley to refine the plan. Ewan Montagu was Cholmondeley's opposite in every way. Born to Baron Swaithling, descended from the Rothschild banking family, Cambridge and Harvard, educated, successful barrister. Connected, confident, Jewish. That last detail mattered. In 1943 Britain, even upper-class Jews faced suspicion. Montagu's younger brother Ivy was a communist and filmmaker. MI5 had files on the entire family, but Montagu also possessed exactly what this operation needed: attention to obsessive detail combined with an understanding of human psychology from his legal work. He'd spent years cross-examining witnesses, spotting inconsistencies, building airtight cases. Now he'd build an airtight lie. The partnership was unlikely, but potent. Cholmondeley provided the architectural vision. Montagu provided the bricks and mortar. Together, they refined Trojan Horse into something far more sophisticated. They changed the name to Operation Mincemeat. Montagu selected it from a list of available code names, his sense of humor having turned macabre after months in naval intelligence. The name seemed like a good omen. The previous operation that had used it succeeded. First problem, the body. This wasn't a theatrical corpse or a prop. German intelligence would examine it. Spanish coroners would perform an autopsy. The body needed to have died in a way consistent with drowning after a plane crash. Montagu consulted Sir Bernard Spilsbury, Britain's most renowned pathologist. Spilsbury delivered a medical lecture that would make the operation possible. Those who died in air crashes often died from shock, not drowning. The lungs didn't necessarily fill with water. Spaniards were Catholic and avoided autopsies unless absolutely necessary. A body could have died from pneumonia, heart failure, or several other causes that would be difficult to distinguish from drowning in a cursory examination. The key word, cursory. Finding a suitable corpse proved nightmarishly difficult. They couldn't ask relatives for permission, impossible to explain the real purpose. They couldn't use a military casualty. Too easy for German intelligence to verify identity. They needed someone with no family, no connections, no one who would miss them or ask questions. Someone who died recently enough that decomposition wouldn't be too advanced. Someone whose cause of death could plausibly pass as drowning. It took months. Then on January 24, 1943, Bentley Purchase contacted Montagu with news. A body had been found in a King's Cross warehouse 2 days earlier. Welsh man, approximately 34 years old, Glyndwr Michael. He'd ingested rat poison, a phosphorus-based paste smeared on bread crusts to attract rats. Whether suicide or simply desperate hunger, no one knew. He'd eaten enough to severely damage his liver, but not enough to kill him instantly. He died slowly at St. Pancras Hospital. He had no living parents, no known relatives, no next of kin. Perfect. The phosphorus poisoning presented a challenge. It yellowed the skin slightly, but Purchase assured them, after several days floating in seawater, any Spanish coroner would attribute the discoloration to decomposition and seawater exposure. The body would pass inspection. There was one other requirement. Montagu commented that the emaciated corpse didn't look like a fit Royal Marines officer. Purchase's reply became legendary among those who knew the operation. He does not have to look like an officer, only a staff officer. More used to office work than combat fitness. The body would work. But there was a time limit. Purchase could keep the body refrigerated at 4 degrees Celsius. Any colder would freeze the flesh, creating obvious evidence of preservation. They had 3 months maximum. After that, decomposition would make the corpse unusable. The clock started ticking. January 28th to April 30th. 92 days to plan, execute, and pray. Creating a fictional identity for a corpse proved more complex than finding the corpse itself. The man needed a name, rank, background, personality, relationships, habits, debts, hopes, dreams. He needed to be real enough that anyone examining his personal effects would never suspect fabrication. They named him Captain William Martin, Acting Major, Royal Marines, assigned to Combined Operations Headquarters under Lord Louis Mountbatten. The name William Martin was common enough to provide plausible deniability if questions arose. Royal Marines courier officers wore battle dress uniforms, looser fitting, easier to dress a stiff corpse in than the tailored uniforms Royal Navy officers wore. That detail alone saved the operation. Montague joked later about the horrid picture of Jeeves' cutter being brought down to measure and fit our corpse for its uniform. Then came the legend building. The details that would make Major William Martin real. They gave him a father, John Glyndwr Martin of Cardiff. They gave him a fiancée, Pam. They gave him financial troubles, an overdraft notice from Lloyd's Bank. They gave him recent activities, ticket stubs from a London theatre performance, dated April 22, 1943. They gave him correspondence, letters from his father and from Pam. They gave him accessories, a silver cross and chain, a photograph of Pam in a bathing suit by the River Thames. They gave him a ring, a receipt for an engagement ring from a London jeweller, dated April 19, 1943. The photograph of Pam came from Jean Leslie, an 18-year-old MI5 clerk. Montague took her out several times, ostensibly to help create the backstory. They racked up receipts, everything from restaurants to theatre tickets. All of it would go in Martin's pockets. Jean Leslie knew the photo made her look seductive for the era. She also knew it might save thousands of lives. The love letters from Pam were typed by secretaries in the intelligence office on Leslie's letterhead. Cholmondeley carried the letters in his own wallet for weeks, folding and unfolding them repeatedly to create wear patterns. Authenticity lived in the details, every crease, every smudge, every worn corner. The overdraft notice was genuine. Montague borrowed it from a colleague's actual bank correspondence, changing only the names. The theatre ticket stubs were purchased and used at actual performances. Martin's wallet contained £18, a reasonable amount for an officer travelling on official business. There were receipts for shirts, for cigarettes, for small personal items, the kind of pocket litter everyone carries, the kind no one bothers to fake, which is precisely why it was so convincing. Then came the documents that would deceive Hitler. 2 letters, carefully crafted to seem casual while containing explosive intelligence. The first letter, which Montague called the vital document, came from Lieutenant General Sir Archibald Nye, Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff, addressed to General Harold Alexander, Commander of Allied Forces in North Africa. Nye knew exactly what the operation required. He drafted it himself after several earlier attempts by the planning team produced text that felt artificial. The letter opened informally. My dear Alex, it discussed personnel matters, including the appointment of a senior officer. Then, almost casually, it mentioned the upcoming operations. Allied forces would strike at Greece and Sardinia. Sicily would be used as a cover target, a feint to draw German attention away from the real objectives. The letter specifically mentioned that intelligence suggesting Sicily as a target should be dismissed as Allied deception. It was a brilliant inversion. Any German intelligence about Sicily could now be written off as part of the Allied deception plan. The real target must be Greece. The second letter came from Lord Louis Mountbatten, Chief of Combined Operations, addressed to Admiral Andrew Cunningham, Commander-in-Chief of the Mediterranean Fleet. It introduced Major William Martin as an expert in amphibious landing techniques. It acknowledged the recent disaster at Dieppe. It even made a joke about sardines, a subtle reinforcement of Sardinia as a target. Both letters were personal correspondence, not official classified documents. This was critical. Personal letters between senior officers would not normally be sent by diplomatic courier or coded signal. They'd be carried by a trusted staff officer. Like Major William Martin, the letters were placed in a locked briefcase, attached to Martin's body by a chain looped through the belt of his trench coat. The chain was leather-covered to prevent chafing. Everything had to appear as if Martin had been carrying the briefcase for hours before the crash. One final touch. Montague placed a single eyelash inside the Nye letter's envelope. If the letter was opened, the eyelash would be disturbed. They'd know if the Germans had read it. The operational planning was equally meticulous. They needed to float the body off the Spanish coast near Huelva. Why Huelva? The local currents would push a body ashore. The town had a German consulate staffed by Adolf Klaus, a known Abwehr intelligence officer. The local Spanish military officers were openly pro-German. The local coroner was less sophisticated than doctors in larger cities like Madrid or Barcelona. And Spain, while officially neutral, had massive debts to Germany and ideological sympathies with the Axis. Documents found on a British officer would almost certainly reach German intelligence. Transportation required a submarine. HMS Seraph, commanded by Lieutenant Bill Jewell. The body needed to be transported in a special container to slow decomposition. Charles Fraser Smith of the Ministry of Supply designed it. Fraser Smith was known in intelligence circles as the man who created gadgets for special operations. After the war, Ian Fleming would base the character Q on him. The container was cylindrical, airtight, large enough to hold a body and filled with dry ice. It was labeled "Handle with Care, Optical Instruments." No one would question optical instruments being transported by submarine. On April 17, 1943, Montague and Cholmondeley transported the container to Scotland. In the back of the van, the body of Glyndwr Michael, dressed in the uniform of Major William Martin. The driver was Jock Horsfall, MI5's chauffeur and one of England's fastest race car drivers. Horsfall was short-sighted and refused to wear glasses. He drove at breakneck speed through the wartime blackout. Montague and Cholmondeley rode in back with the canister, praying they'd survive the journey. They arrived at Holy Loch on April 19th. Loading the body onto HMS Seraph presented one final problem. The corpse's feet had frozen solid. They couldn't get the boots on. Montague, Cholmondeley, and Purchase stood in a Scottish naval facility using an electric heater to defrost a dead man's feet. It took 20 minutes. The boots finally went on. Martin was ready for his mission. HMS Seraph departed Holy Loch on April 19, 1943. The crew was told the canister contained a secret meteorological device. Only Lieutenant Jewell and his officers knew the truth. For 10 days, the submarine traveled south through the Atlantic. Inside the canister, dry ice slowed but couldn't stop decomposition. By the time they arrived off the coast of Huelva on April 30th, the body would be approximately 5 days dead. Perfect timing. At 4:30 a.m. on April 30th, 1943, HMS Seraph surfaced 1 mile off the Spanish coast. The crew was sent below. Jewell and his officers opened the canister. The smell hit them immediately, but the body was intact. They dressed it in a Mae West life preserver, checked every detail one final time. The briefcase was secured. The identification papers were in place. The wallet with its photographs and theatre stubs was in the inner pocket. Even the keys to a non-existent London flat were there. At 4:30 a.m., they slid Major William Martin into the Mediterranean. The current caught the body immediately, pulling it toward shore. HMS Seraph's captain sent a signal to London. Mincemeat complete. Now came the hardest part. Waiting. At 9:30 a.m., Spanish sardine fisherman José Antonio Rey Maria spotted a body floating near Punta Umbrella. He hauled it into his boat. British officer, Royal Marines, briefcase chained to his belt. Rey Maria rowed to shore and notified the authorities. Within hours, the body was in the hands of the Spanish Navy. Vice Admiral Moreno ordered a perfunctory autopsy. 2 Spanish doctors performed the examination on May 1st, with British Vice Consul Francis Hazelden present. Cause of death: asphyxiation through immersion in the sea. The doctors spent less than an hour on the examination. They were Spanish Catholics. The body wore a silver cross. They buried Major William Martin on May 2, 1943, with full military honours in Huelva Cemetery. The tombstone read the lies that Montague and Cholmondeley had crafted. William Martin, born 29th March 1907, died 24th April 1943, beloved son of John Glyndwr Martin and the late Antonia Martin of Cardiff, Wales, dulce et decorum, est pro patria mori, R.I.P. It is sweet and fitting to die for one's country. Glyndwr Michael's true epitaph. But the briefcase didn't go into the ground with Martin. The Spanish Navy held it, and then the deception operation began its most critical phase. British Vice Consul Hazelden immediately began sending urgent coded messages to London. The codes were ones the British knew the Germans had broken earlier in the war. The messages all said the same thing. The briefcase contained highly secret documents that absolutely must be returned immediately. The frantic British efforts to recover the case were themselves part of the deception. If the documents weren't important, why would the British be so desperate? In Huelva, Adolf Klaus, the German Abwehr intelligence officer, learned about the British officer's body within hours. He immediately approached his Spanish military contacts. Could he examine the documents before they were returned to the British? The Spanish military officers were, as the British had calculated, pro-German. They agreed, but they couldn't simply hand over British documents to German intelligence. That would violate Spanish neutrality too openly. Instead, they did something more subtle. They carefully steamed open the envelopes, used thin steel rods to roll the letters out without breaking the seals, photographed every page, soaked the documents in seawater to simulate additional exposure, then resealed everything and prepared to return it to the British. The entire process took 4 days. The photographed documents were in Berlin by May 9th. They landed on the desk of Colonel Alexis von Roene, head of the German General Staff's Intelligence Evaluation Section. Von Roene read the Nye letter 3 times. He checked the signature against known samples of Nye's handwriting. He analyzed the paper, the typewriter characteristics, the military letterhead. Everything checked out. On May 9th, von Roene submitted his initial assessment. The documents appeared genuine and suggested Allied landings in Greece and Sardinia, with Sicily as a feint. 4 days later, Captain Ulrich of the German General Staff produced a more detailed analysis. His report, dated May 14th and intended for Admiral Karl Dönitz, was even more enthusiastic. Examination as to whether they were intentionally put into our hands shows that this is most unlikely. The Germans had convinced themselves. No formal investigation had been conducted. No independent verification attempted. They simply wanted to believe. In the margin of Ulrich's report, Admiral Dönitz's personal initials appeared. He'd read it. He believed it. And Dönitz was one of Hitler's most trusted advisors. On May 11th, the Spanish returned the briefcase and documents to Hazelden. The diplomatic pouch carried them to London. MI5's forensic experts examined everything with magnifying glasses and chemical tests. The eyelash Montague had placed in the envelope was gone. Microscopic scratches on the paper showed where it had been rolled onto rods. Chemical analysis revealed traces of the developing solution used to photograph documents. The Germans had taken the bait. Now the question was, would they act on it? At Bletchley Park, the government code and cipher school was reading German communications. Ultra intercepts, the crown jewel of British intelligence. German military signals were being decrypted in near real time. On May 12th, Bletchley intercepted a message from Berlin to German forces in the Mediterranean. It warned that the Allied invasion would target the Balkans. The Dodecanese Islands, Greece, Sicily was mentioned only as a possible feint. On May 14th, Admiral Dönitz met with Hitler to discuss his recent visit to Italy and meeting with Mussolini. Dönitz's war diary recorded Hitler's response to the mincemeat intelligence. The Führer does not agree with the douche that Sicily is the most likely invasion point. Hitler was convinced, and when Hitler believed something, his subordinates fell in line. One by one, the key advisors accepted the deception. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, head of the Abwehr; General Alfred Jodl, chief of the operations staff; Ernst Kaltenbrunner, head of Reich Security; General Walter Vorlimont, deputy chief of operations. Even Mussolini, initially skeptical, came around to the same view by May 20th. The German response was immediate and massive. Hitler ordered the 1st Panzer Division transferred from France to Greece. 7 infantry divisions moved from Italy to Greece. 10 more infantry divisions shifted from Italy to the Balkans. German naval forces laid minefields off the Greek coast. Shore batteries were established on Greek islands. The first R-boat flotilla transferred from Sicily to the Aegean Sea in early June. Torpedo boats moved from Sicily to Greece. Sardinia's garrison was doubled from 10,000 to 20,000 troops. By late June, Sicily's defences had been stripped to reinforce the real invasion targets. Brigadier Leslie Hollis, secretary to the Chiefs of Staff Committee, sent a message to Churchill on May 14th. Churchill was in the United States at the time, meeting with Roosevelt. The message read, "Mincemeat swallowed rod, line and sinker by the right people, and from the best information, they look like acting on it." Churchill's reply was characteristically brief. Excellent. Montague continued the deception by including Major William Martin's name in the official British casualty list published in the Times on June 4th. By coincidence, 2 other officers who died in actual plane crashes at sea were published the same day. Opposite the casualty listings, a report noted that actor Leslie Howard had been shot down by the Luftwaffe over the Bay of Biscay. The confluence of stories gave Martin's death additional credibility. No one questioned a name in the casualty list. On July 9, 1943, Operation Husky began. 160,000 Allied troops launched the largest amphibious invasion before D-Day. More than 3,000 ships, over 4,000 aircraft, 8 divisions, landing across 105 miles of Sicilian coastline. The assault started before sunrise. A summer storm had scattered some of the airborne forces, but it also convinced the Germans that no invasion would happen in such weather. The Allies achieved tactical surprise. Even 4 hours after the invasion began, German forces were still sending aircraft from Sicily to reinforce Sardinia. Ultra-intercepts confirmed it. 21 aircraft left Sicily heading east, convinced the real attack was yet to come. Hitler remained convinced for days that Sicily was merely a feint. The main assault on Greece must be imminent. On July 23rd, he appointed Field Marshal Erwin Rommel as commander of forces in Greece to prepare defences against the real invasion. By the time German High Command realized their mistake, it was too late. The British had estimated 10,000 casualties in the first week of fighting. Final casualty figures, approximately 1,500 in the first week, 1/7 of the projection. The Royal Navy had expected to lose 300 ships to coastal defences. Final losses, 12 ships. The entire Sicily campaign lasted 38 days instead of the projected 90. Allied casualties for the entire operation, approximately 24,850 killed, wounded, and missing. Without mincemeat, that number could have been 50,000 or higher. The strategic consequences extended far beyond Sicily. On July 24, 1943, as the battle for Sicily raged, the Italian Grand Council of Fascism voted to limit Mussolini's power. King Victor Emmanuel III took control of the Italian armed forces. Mussolini resigned the next day. The first Axis power was beginning to collapse. Italy would surrender on September 8, 1943. The diversion of German forces to Greece and the Balkans had another effect Hitler couldn't foresee. In July 1943, Germany launched Operation Citadel, the massive offensive against the Kursk salient in Russia. It was supposed to be the decisive blow on the Eastern Front. But divisions that should have been available for Kursk had been sent to Greece. Panzer units that should have reinforced the offensive were defending against an invasion that would never come. The Soviet victory at Kursk became the turning point of the entire Eastern Front. Hitler never regained the initiative against Russia. Operation Mincemeat's ghost divisions weren't just absent from Sicily. They were absent from Kursk. One corps, two fronts, incalculable consequences. The true identity of Major William Martin remained classified for decades. Ewan Montagu wrote a book in 1953, The Man Who Never Was. It became a bestseller and was adapted into a film in 1956. But Montagu couldn't reveal operational details. He didn't mention signals intelligence confirming the operation's success. He didn't mention the organized program of strategic deception that Mincemeat was part of. He certainly didn't reveal the corpse's identity. Montagu described him only as a bit of a ne'er-do-well, and that the only worthwhile thing that he ever did, he did after his death. Cold words, true words. Glyndwr Michael's life had been marked by tragedy, poverty, and isolation. His death marked by purpose, precision, and impact. In 1977, Montagu published his wartime autobiography, Beyond Top Secret U. It provided more details about mincemeat and other operations, but still no name for the corpse. The identity remained a mystery for 53 years. Then in 1996, amateur historian Roger Morgan was researching in the Public Record Office. He found a recently declassified document. It contained a name, Glyndwr Michael. The man who never was had finally been identified. In January 1998, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission added a new inscription to the grave in Huelva. Beneath the false name and false details, Glyndwr Michael served as Major William Martin, R.M. Both identities, both truths. The nobody who became somebody by becoming nobody. In November 2021, the Jewish American Society for Historic Preservation placed a memorial at Hackney Mortuary. The plaque tells the story: a Jewish officer, Ewan Montagu, a British aristocrat, Charles Cholmondeley, a Welsh homeless man, Glyndwr Michael. Their partnership saved thousands of lives. The Operation Mincemeat Memorial acknowledges what Montagu's generation could not. Glyndwr Michael had been a real person, not just a useful corpse. He'd been born in Aberbargod, Wales. His father, Thomas, a coal miner, committed suicide when Glyndwr was 15. His mother died when he was 31. He worked as a gardener and labourer, never holding a job for long. Homeless, friendless, struggling with depression. He drifted to London, where he died at 34 from rat poison. Whether by suicide or desperate hunger, we'll never know. Montagu and Cholmondeley were both decorated for Operation Mincemeat. Montagu was appointed an officer of the Order of the British Empire in 1944. Cholmondeley received the Member of the Order of the British Empire in 1948. After the war, Montagu continued his legal career, eventually becoming Judge Advocate of the Fleet. He died in 1985 at age 84. Cholmondeley left MI5 in 1952, moved to the West Country, married, and started a horticultural machinery business. He died in 1982 at age 65. Both men lived long lives, filled with accomplishment and recognition. Glyndwr Michael got none of that, but he got something else. He proved that in total war, even death could be weaponized. That fiction could defeat facts, that a homeless man could fool the Führer. Operation Mincemeat revealed fundamental truths about intelligence warfare. First, deception works best when it confirms what the target already wants to believe. Hitler wanted to believe Greece was the target because he'd always been obsessed with the Balkans. The mincemeat documents didn't create a new idea in Hitler's mind. They reinforced an existing one. As intelligence historian Michael Handel wrote, "It is very unusual and very difficult for deception to create new concepts for an enemy. It is much easier and more effective to reinforce those which already exist." Second, authenticity lives in the details. It wasn't the official documents that sold the deception, it was the theatre ticket stubs. The overdraft notice, the photograph of Pam, the worn love letters, the engagement ring receipt. German intelligence didn't just verify the big things, they verified everything. And everything checked out because Montagu and Cholmondeley had sweated every microscopic detail. They'd even argued about which brand of cigarettes Major Martin would smoke. Third, the dead make perfect agents. They can't be interrogated, they can't break under pressure. They can't reveal anything beyond what you've planted on them. A living courier carrying those documents would have faced intense scrutiny if captured. Martin's corpse faced only a perfunctory Spanish autopsy and German document analysis. The documents were analyzed. The messenger was buried. Fourth, operational security through compartmentalization. HMS Seraph's crew never knew what was in the canister. Jan Leslie didn't know the full scope of the operation. Even Churchill and Eisenhower only knew broad outlines. The fewer people who knew the complete picture, the less chance of leaks. Cholmondeley and Montagu were the only ones who knew everything, and they took most of the details to their graves. Military historians still debate Operation Mincemeat's exact impact. Sir Michael Howard, author of the official British History of Strategic Deception, called it perhaps the most successful single deception operation of the entire war. John Latimer argued that Sicily's conquest owed as much to Hitler's distrust of Italy and his Balkans obsession as to mincemeat. Michael Howard acknowledged that Hitler's congenital obsession with the Balkans was probably more significant than any deception. Ben Macintyre, author of the definitive mincemeat history, concluded that its exact impact is impossible to calculate, but the numbers speak for themselves. Expected casualties, 10,000 in the first week. Actual casualties, 1,500 in the first week. Expected ship losses, 300. Actual ship losses, 12. Expected campaign duration, 90 days. Actual duration, 38 days. Those weren't just statistics. They were 8,500 fathers who came home, 8,500 sons who didn't die on Sicilian beaches, 288 ships that didn't sink, thousands of sailors who didn't drown, 52 extra days of war shortened, 52 days of death, suffering, and destruction avoided. The techniques refined in Operation Mincemeat became doctrine. The concept of using false documents on corpses appeared again in later operations. The attention to personal details in creating legends for agents, the use of seemingly casual personal correspondence instead of official documents, the exploitation of enemy preconceptions and biases, the importance of feedback loops, using signals intelligence to verify whether deceptions were believed. All of this became standard tradecraft for Western intelligence services throughout the Cold War. There's a grave in Huelva, Spain, that tells two stories. William Martin, born 29th March 1907, died 24th April 1943, beloved son of John Glyndwr Martin and the late Antonia Martin of Cardiff, Wales. Below it, Glyndwr Michael served as Major William Martin, RM. One tombstone, two names, two men. One was invented to deceive Hitler. The other was forgotten until 1996, but both are remembered now. The memorial plaque at Hackney Mortuary quotes Psalm 141:3 in English and Hebrew. "Set a watch before my mouth, Lord, and over the door of my lips." An appropriate verse for an operation built on lies that served truth, on words that saved lives, on secrets that changed history. Glyndwr Michael was 34 when he died in a London warehouse, alone and forgotten. Nobody mourned him. Nobody buried him under his real name. Nobody knew that his death would matter. But on July 10, 1943, when 160,000 Allied soldiers hit Sicilian beaches against lighter opposition than anyone expected, Glyndwr Michael's death mattered more than most of the living would ever understand. When those soldiers went home to their families instead of dying on Mediterranean shores, Glyndwr Michael's death had meaning his life never had. When Mussolini fell and Italy collapsed and the first Axis domino toppled, Glyndwr Michael, homeless, forgotten, nobody, had helped push it. The corpse lied to the Führer, and the Führer believed it. That's how wars are won, not always by the strongest or bravest, sometimes by the most creative, sometimes by the most detailed, sometimes by the most audacious, sometimes by a lie so perfect that even death couldn't keep it secret. Sometimes by three men, a Jewish lawyer, an awkward aristocrat, and a homeless Welshman. Sometimes by theatre tickets and love letters and an overdraft notice. Sometimes by human details so authentic that intelligence officers never questioned them. Operation Mincemeat proved that in intelligence warfare, the perfect deception isn't about grand strategy or complex schemes. It's about making fiction feel more real than reality. It's about knowing your enemy so well that you know what they want to believe before they know it themselves. It's about sweating every detail until there's no distinction between the lie and the truth. And it's about understanding that sometimes the most valuable weapon isn't bullets or bombs. Sometimes it's a corpse, a briefcase, and a story so convincing that even Adolf Hitler bought it. Glyndwr Michael lived 34 years without making a difference. He died making the difference of thousands of lives. The man who never was saved the men who always were. And in the end, that's the only epitaph that matters. Epitaph that matters. Epitaph that matters. Epitaph that matters. Epitaph that matters.